Welcome, everybody. All right, today we're talking about cognitive bias. Now, what is that? Biases occur as an attempt to justify the world around us and make a whole lot of information faster and easier. Confirmation bias is basically the tendency to interpret new information as confirmation of your pre-existing beliefs and opinions while giving disproportionately less consideration to alternative possibilities. Now, we see that in the media all day long, every day of our lives. And real world examples of confirmation bias have gained attention. And the bias seeps into research world where they do cognitively bias research, which psychologists selectively interpret data or ignore unfavorable data or producers of media to produce results that support their initial hypothesis. Now, political parties do this all day long. Confirmation bias is also incredibly persuasive on the internet, particularly with social media. We tend to read online news articles that support the beliefs that we have or fail to seek out sources that challenge them. So what you end up having is psychotic people burning Teslas on the corner or trying to kill people that are ICE or try to kill the president or whatever because they're psychotic and they have cognitive bias. And various social media platforms like Facebook help reinforce our confirmation bias by feeding us stories that we are likely to agree with, and further pushes us down into the echo chambers of our political polarization. So we've got the Trump derangement syndrome and the Eli derangement syndrome and the MAGA, derangement syndrome. And people go down this pipeline and they can't come back unless they finally face reality that things are a little bit different than they believe. Examples of confirmation bias are especially harmful, specifically in the context of the law. For example, a detective may identify a suspect early in an investigation, seek out confirming evidence of their suspicions, and downplay any evidence that falsifies that. There's also confirmation bias dates back as a cognitive term, as a real term in 1960 when Peter Wasson challenged participants to identify a rule applying triples of numbers. People were first told that the sequences of 2, 4, 6 fit the rule. And then they had to generate triples of their own and were told whether the sequence fits the rule. And the rule was simple: any ascending sequence. But only did the participants have unusually difficult time realizing this and instead devised overly complicated hypotheses to do triples of numbers, triples of patterns. They also generated triples that confirmed their pre-existing hypotheses. And so they would take the rules and they would bend them to what they wanted them to be. Cognitive bias is a systematic error in thinking, affecting how we process information, perceive others, make decisions. It can lead to irrational thoughts and judgments. It's often based on our perceptions, our memories, our individual and societal beliefs. We have all these crazy Democratic advocates out there doing all kinds of crazy things, like trying to support these criminals that have come here from out of our country, haven't even been processed, walked straight across our border because we didn't have a president for 4 years. We had 12 or 15 people signing any kind of law they could to make this country become something different than what it is, which is what they wanted it to be, a socialist experiment. And so now we've got all these crazies in our country, and people are thinking that they are actual citizens being attacked. It's crazy, but these biases are how they operate. So what are they going to do? They're going to go out there and throw their car and shoot people and that are trying to uphold the law and do whatever they can. And the Democratic Party is very biased, and they've gone down that rabbit hole to the point that hopefully they don't get elected, but I'm sure they will because our young people have been biased into thinking just like they do, and they think they're totally correct. And this is kind of what people did when they joined a cult. It's very cultish. So biases are unconscious and automatic processes. They're designed to make decision making quicker and more efficient. They can be caused by many things like, heuristic mental shortcuts, social pressures, emotions, and biases is a tendency to lean in favor or against a person, a group, an idea, a thing, usually in an unfair way. And they are natural as a part of our human experience. And they don't simply exist in a vacuum and in our minds, they affect the way we make decisions and act, like all these crazy judges that are out there making decisions against any executive order that the president puts out there simply because they're psychotic, need to advocate for what they believe is right, and because they were appointed by advocates, they're out there advocating, doing what they've always done in their little vacuum. Explicit biases can be good because it helps provide you with a sense of identity. And that's a good thing. At least if you establish identity, you establish some sense of confidence in yourself, sense of direction, and it can lead you to make decisions. For example, being biased towards healthy foods. That can be a good thing. If you want to be biased towards freedom, that can be a good thing. If you can be I mean, we're all biased towards something. We all have different things that are meaningful to us in our lives. And then there's unconscious bias, and these things represent a set of unintentional biases. And some people are unaware of their attitudes and behaviors resulting from them. It's often a result of your brain's attempt to simplify information processing. We receive about 11 million bits of information per second, and we can only process about 40 of those 11 million bits per second. Therefore, we often rely on mental shortcuts to simplify the 11 million and put them in a category within the 4 bits of information that we can process within any given second. And these errors tend to arise from problems related to thinking, memory, attention, and other mental mistakes because we look to each other as social creatures to see how other people have made mental shortcuts, and we're so lazy that we'll buy their crap instead of actually handling the issue on our own. We often rely on these shortcuts and we rely on other people to form those shortcuts for us. And so we'll sit on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, TikTok or whatever thing, and we will let that influence our decisions. So we'll Google something and figure out what is the quickest mental shortcut for this one. And that forms biases. That's why you have people like Elon Musk out there, Elon Musk trying to form his own political party because he has X, which now can bias you into thinking that he's right about everything. Cognitive biases can be especially when you call him the smartest person in the world. Beneficial because they do not require mental effort. They can allow you to make decisions quickly. They put everything in very black and white terms, and they can also take form with harmful prejudice that serves to hurt an individual group. So people that hate people that voted for Trump, they have thrown those people into a group, and they're all one type of people. They're all one type of thing to be prejudiced against. I'm not going to go to family visits or family gatherings because of that. I mean, these people are freaking psychotic when they get their biases, and that's how people are. They're tribal creatures. That's how we think. We're lazy. And so we use cognitive bias to be a funnel to decipher information. Now, real intelligence, if you want to be, means that you're able to look at information and look at the good and the bad. But that also means you take the time to process information. So if you're going to form a cognitive bias, the best thing you could possibly do is look at both sides of the coin or look at more than just the side that you're looking at. Now, what real intelligence is Socratic. It's like all the philosophers. They would discuss an idea, they would sit on the steps of the Acropolis, they would all debate the idea. They would all have their own way of processing the idea. And each of them would contribute to each other's thought processes, and each would have their own bias, which was normal, but they were willing to hear each other. This is how the education system works in highly educated environments like England, where they value Socratic learning, where everybody has an opinion, has a bias, and they all influence each other by getting together and talking about it. That is how real intellect is formed, but people are so rarely able to tap into real intellect because they're lazy and they want to go to Google and they want to believe they're right about everything. So what they do is they operate in their own little vacuum in their brains. It may feel like there's been a recent rise of unconscious bias, but this has been a part of the brutality of the human race for centuries. We also have to understand when confirmation bias or why it occurs, and it's particularly due to the effect of desire on our beliefs. In other words, certain desired conclusions, like ones that support our beliefs, are more likely to be processed by the brain and labeled as true. So the motivational explanation is often coupled with more cognitive theory. Cognitive explanation argues that because our minds can only focus on one thing at a time, it's hard to parallel process. And so we form alternative hypotheses. So as a result, we only process the information that aligns with our particular beliefs. And that is how resentment is formed. Resentment is formed when you only look for certain things from your spouse that you believe they are. I think you're a very controlling person. So what you do as the listener, you listen to your spouse as if they're a controlling person and you look for everything you can to access the bias that you have. Anything that they say, anything that they do, anything that their communication exhibits, you're going to throw them into the category of you are a control freak. And what you do is, despite the fact that that's less than 0.01% of the day or the conversations that you're having, you're validating your story about that person, and that's the only way that you're going to decipher who they are. You're a control freak, that's what you are, and that's how I'm always going to treat you, especially when control freak things I notice about you come up. Now I'm going to call you that all day long. And maybe tomorrow I'll treat you a little different. And we'll go out and have dinner. We'll have breakfast. We'll have a nice time. Maybe we'll have sex. We'll do whatever. We'll do a wonderful time. But I'm always going to remember only, most importantly, what I'm attached to is that that's my story about you. That's cognitive bias. And that's resentment. And it sucks because living in resentment is one of the ingredients that take people to burnout. If you want to burn out, you live with three things: worry, disrespect, and resentment. If you operate with worry, disrespect, and resentment in your life, you're going to burn out. You're going to get divorced, or you're going to be miserably married, and your children are going to be twice as miserable having to deal with your ugly ass. Now, if you want to resolve that, you live in faith. That doesn't mean God. It means you have faith that good things are going to happen. You live in respect, which means you become a good listener instead of opening your ugly mouth. And then you actually be grateful for people. Now, if you can do that, you're not going to make your family miserable. Unfortunately, people love to make their family miserable. That's one of their favorite things to do, is to hold on to their cognitive bias as if they're holding the poop in their butthole. Hindsight bias refers to the tendency to perceive past events as more predictable than they actually were. So there's cognitive and emotional explanations for why we ascribe to so many certainty to knowing the outcome of an event only once the event is completed. So when sports fans know the outcome of a game, they question certain decisions that coaches make and they otherwise would not have questioned or second guessed. So if they win the game, or if they're going to win the game, they're not going to question anything. They're going to be like, oh, they made the best decisions in their life. But if they lose the game, they're going to filter everything through what everybody did wrong. And that's what kind of turds we are as human beings. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. We were talking about cognitive bias. A thing called hindsight bias is one of the categories of cognitive bias. Research studies have demonstrated that hindsight bias isn't necessarily mitigated by pure recognition of the bias, but the deal is hindsight bias means something happens and then I analyze it after. It's called Monday morning quarterbacking. And yes, I become the expert after the event, not before, but after the event. The thing is, you can still make a conscious effort to remind yourself that you can't predict the future, motivate yourself to consider alternative explanations. But here's what happens. People make spontaneous decisions based on the facts that they have in front of them. And when we do that, we don't always have all of the information to make our decisions, but we have to make the decisions in the moment. So the idiots that make tons of money sitting on television and telling you what these coaches should have done or these players could have done or should have done, these jerks and these people on their little podcasts have to sit there and Monday morning quarterback every decision that was ever made, and they make tons of money doing that. It's important to do all we can to reduce biases because when we are overly confident about our ability to predict outcomes, we might make future risky decisions that could have potentially dangerous outcomes. So if you've got one of these people who think they can figure out what all outcomes are going to be, send them to Vegas and see how long they keep their money. There's also a thing, experiments. Excuse me. There's a thing called self-serving bias, and it's a tendency to take personal responsibility for positive outcomes and blame external factors for negative outcomes. That's called a narcissist. We have tons of those in this world because people don't take accountability anymore. They just point fingers, point fingers, point fingers. That's why all these idiots hate Trump because he actually makes decisions and now they have something to hate. You would be right to ask this similar fundamental attribution error, which identifies our tendency to overemphasize internal factors for other people's behavior while attributing external factors to our own. So the distinction is that self-serving bias is concerned with valence. That is, how good or bad an event or situation is. And it's only concerned with events for which you are the actor. So, in other words, a driver cuts in front of you, and as the light turns green, the fundamental thing that's going to happen is the error might cause you to think that they are a bad person, or not consider the possibility that they were late for work or didn't see you. God forbid that happen. So what do? You turn into a jerk. You start flipping them off. You start yelling. You start driving behind them like you're an idiot, putting your family at risk, putting your life at risk. Who cares? Because you're angry and you feel like you're disrespected just because the person was late for work and they didn't see you. So you turn it into a Broadway production. That's called a self-serving bias. And it's exercised only when you're the actor. And if athletes are quick to take responsibility for personal wins, attributing their success to their hard work and their mental toughness, but point to external factors like unfair calls, like an umpire, or bad weather, and then they can sit around and point fingers at all those things. In the workplace, people attribute internal factors when they've hired for a job, but external factors when they're fired for a job or didn't get the job. Self-serving bias is more prevalent in individualistic cultures. So that means that we don't hold each other accountable because we're all individuals and we all have our perceptions of the truth and we all have to believe each other having a different perception of the truth. People have to cope with failure in all kinds of crazy ways. Some drink, some smoke, some take drugs, some have sex, some do all kinds of stupid things, some say stupid things. That's what they do because God forbid if they become a failure. Self-esteem levels, individual goals can be that. If you put all of your self-worth into your job, you're probably going to have a problem when your boss doesn't like you or things are not predictable at work. You're going to be unsteady. If you put all your self-esteem into your family and your family's in chaos, you're probably going to be in chaos too. You are going to be your moods, if you are a self-serving biased person, which most people are, you are going to be out of touch with reality anytime that where your self-worth is placed becomes chaotic or unpredictable, or possibilities that bad things could happen because you were an idiot and did something wrong. Overcoming bias can be difficult because it is the expense of our self-esteem. Nevertheless, practicing self-compassion by treating yourself with kindness and believing that you are a good person, you are resilient, you will make it through, that's a faith-based thing. And it really requires us to have that to operate well in this life. There's also a thing called anchoring bias, and that's individualistic cultures is closely related to decision-making process that occurs when we rely too heavily on either pre-existing information or the first piece of information when making a decision. So anchoring bias means, oh, I heard from blah, blah, blah that this is going to happen. So that's what's going to happen. I'm going to look for this to happen. So such and such is having a bad day, so they're probably going to do something really stupid, blah, 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 and I'm going to prepare for that. So anchoring biases is whatever information you take in on your Google, on your Facebook or your X or your TikTok or whatever, your YouTubes, whatever they tell you, that is going to be anchoring bias information. People that the kids that sit around watching the stupid video game people that play video games all day that want to listen to, figure out how to cut corners in the video game, what they're going to do is look for that, and they're going to look for that information, and that is going to be their anchoring bias when they go play a game. They're going to experience what the YouTuber experienced. You know, we have to understand that we are such susceptible, easily influenced people. There's also multiple theories that seek to explain the existence of the bias called the anchoring bias. One theory is known as anchoring and adjustment, and it argues that once an anchor is established, that's information that people have found, people insufficiently adjust away from it to arrive to their own final answer. And their final guess or decision is closer to the anchor than it otherwise would have been. When people experience a greater cognitive load, the amount of information working memory can hold at any given time, they are more susceptible to the effects of anchoring. So if I'm overwhelmed, I'm probably going to grab onto whatever you tell me as the only information, and it's going to bias how I operate. So there's also this, anchors change someone's attitude to be more favorable to the anchor. So if we like the information that we're getting from a certain source, we're going to be biased towards that source unless we get rejected by what we do, by their opinion or what they say we should do. There's many different theories of why we experience anchoring bias. The primary ingredient is we're lazy. The other primary ingredient is we're not that smart. The other primary ingredient is we think that if we gather information quickly, we are going to have a better outcome. The problem is nowadays the information that's out there on social media is very broad, it's very opinionated, it's not very factual, and if you want to reinforce whatever point of view you want to reinforce, you can find somebody out there saying something dumb enough to back up what you're saying. It's really important to understand how people operate. There's also this thing called availability bias. It's also referred to as a availability heuristic, and it refers to the tendency to seek examples of things that readily come to mind that are more common than what is actually the case. In other words, information that comes to us and it faster influences decision we make about the future and about you as a person. So, If I think of you as, oh, well, you don't love me, I'm going to conclude you don't love me, and I'm going to grab all kinds of things that you do that reinforce you don't love me. And the only thing I'm going to care about is my little book that I'm writing about you, rather than all the other things that we do together. I'm going to ignore who you are as a person. I'm going to ignore all the good, and I'm only going to look at the crap that I want to look at that determines I know you better than you know yourself. I know all your dirty secrets, and I'm going to tell the world. And this is what people do when they have these kind of biases. What they do is they go to court after you're getting divorced and they spill all kinds of bias about you to the judge and to everybody sitting in the courtroom, and everybody thinks you're a jerk. You are a jerk because you never know who you marry until you divorce them. And then you see their real ugly ass, not the one you've been kissing all these years. Yeah, so in other words, information that comes to mind faster influences decisions we make about the future. So instead of being a memory fabrication, it's an overemphasis on certain memories. That's called availability bias. It means it's readily available information. In the workplace, if someone is being considered for a promotion, but their boss recalls one bad thing that happened years ago, but left a lasting impression, that one event might have an outside influence on the final decision. Other common examples buying lottery tickets because the lifestyle benefits of winning are more readily available in mind, and the potential emotions associated with winning and seeing other people win than the complex probability calculation of actually winning the lottery. A final common example is used to demonstrate the availability bias, describes how seeing several television shows or news reports about shark attacks, let's say, makes you think that the incident is relatively common, even though it's not common at all. So, regardless, and so you're probably not going to want to get in the ocean. So, regardless of thinking, that may make you less inclined to go to the water and actually may kill the buzz about going on a nice Caribbean vacation. It's really important, because we have to understand that there's a whole bunch of processes about how we operate. First of all, we have limitations in our memory. We all need to understand that. That means that all information that we take in is biased. Each of us has our own perception of the truth. And what's really important is you need to embrace that and go, yeah, you see things different than I do. You perceive me in a whole different light than I perceive myself. And you know what? You're entitled. And it must suck to feel that way about me. And I can understand that. Now, if we were more people that actually face the reality that our job is not to correct other people or make them align with us, but actually understand them and have compassion for their biases, we would all love each other a whole lot better. But instead of that, we live in our little stupid tribes and do our little stupid things because of our own cognitive biases, and our tribes support our biases. We all want to seek perspective when we make decisions. That's why I like our president. He seeks different perspectives. And it's a good thing that he seeks different perspectives because that means he makes good decisions called common sense. Unlike the Democrats who hate anything he does, they don't realize that they look dumber and dumber and dumber by the day because he makes consultative decisions and they make biased political decisions, and they have no business representing people in this country, period, except for their little anarchy people like the ones out here in Seattle, the truly psychotic. Choosing strategies to prevent cognitive error means that we embrace Socratic thinking. We gather information from multiple sources that are different. That's high intelligence, folks. This occurs because the brain is constantly trying to minimize the effort necessary to make decisions. So we rely on certain memories, ones that we can recall more easily, instead of having to endure the task of calculating statistical probabilities and looking into other people's experiences. The main types of easy years are easy to recall. There is short-term memory and there's long-term memory. We want to operate with both forms of memory to make our decisions, not just short-term memory. Short-term memory creates short-term outcomes. The other popular form of cognitive bias is called inattentional blindness. This occurs when a person fails to notice a stimulus that is plain sight because of their attention is directed elsewhere. For example, if you're driving a car, you might be so focused on the road ahead of you that you completely fail to notice a car swerve into your lane of traffic. Because your attention is directed elsewhere, you aren't able to react in time and potentially leading to a car accident. So experiencing inattentional blindness has its obvious consequences. But like all biases, it's not impossible to overcome it. And so what we want to do is be more accountable for what stimulates us and what draws us away. It's so important to understand how biases affect all of us. There's many strategies used to avoid biases that are described, in all kinds of different aspects of social media and so in all kinds of research. But we have to look at the history. The term cognitive biases was coined in the 70s by a psychologist in Israel called Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, who used the phrase to describe people's flawed thinking patterns in response to judgmental and decision-making problems and patterns. And as a result of our limited resources, people are forced to rely on quick mental shortcuts to make their decisions. This is how we're all built, guys. We make shortcuts. Now, hopefully, our shortcuts incorporate people with different opinions and different perspectives, and we're open to hearing those different perspectives so that we can come to a good, solid decision. People's responses can be compared and predetermined because you have to understand when you're getting a source, you have to understand how biased that source is. I know that if somebody were to be married and you ask them what do you think about your spouse, they're probably going to spout all the things that they can't stand about them and all the things they like about them because they want to be nice. But in truth, they have all kinds of things that they don't like about them. That's called bias. We see the world through our biases. That's how we operate. Sometimes it's how we survive. There's that we have to understand that we have to start observing our biases because if you live in a smaller society where you don't have access to the whole world, which we do with social media, if we actually tune down on what we access the whole world and actually understand that we have to be accountable to the community we live in, we would be a lot more accountable for a lot of the things that we do in this life. All right, we're going to take another break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about cognitive bias. The human brain is really powerful, but it's subject to a lot of limitations. Biases are often a result of your brain's attempt to simplify information processing. They often work as rules of thumb and help you make sense of the world and reach decisions with relative speed. But some of these biases are related to memory. And the way you remember an event may be biased for a number of reasons that in turn can lead to biased thinking and decision making. There's other biases that may be related to problems with attention. Attention is a very limited resource. People have to be selective about what they pay attention to in the world around them if they want to be wise. Unfortunately, 30% of our population are ADHD crazies, and they are hunters. So their sensory perception is 5 times greater than the gatherers, which are the other 70%. So what they do is they wander the planet being distracted by whatever their stimulation is around them, whether it's smell, vision, hearing, whatever. Even their spidey sense, they have really good intuition about what's behind them, and they're always listening to everything around them and responding to it. So their bias is their sensory perception, which distracts them from doing the things that they commit to do. People sometimes confuse cognitive bias with logical fallacies, but the two aren't the same. Logical fallacy stems from an error in logical argument, while cognitive bias is rooted in thought processing errors that arise from problems with memory, attention, attribution, being overwhelmed, and mental mistakes. Everyone exhibits cognitive bias. It may be easier to spot in one person than another, but it's important to know that it's something that also affects your thinking. And there are some signs that you might be influenced by some type of cognitive bias. Paying attention to news stories that confirm your opinions, like all of the media out there, except for a couple small sources that actually somewhat support this current government in the United States, which has literally saved our country. Blaming outside factors when things don't go your way, attributing other people's success to luck, but taking personal credit for your own accomplishments as if you're the only functioning thing in this world, assuming that everyone shares your opinions or beliefs. Boy, that's psychotic, but the Democrats believe that one. Learning a little about a topic and then assuming you know all about it. Yes, these people know so much about immigration and what the difference is between an immigrant and an illegal immigrant. And they don't understand the difference because they listen to the media and they listen to the idiots in the Democratic Party that tell you that all immigrants are just immigrants. They're not illegal immigrants. There's no such thing, even though they voted for the laws that are currently being enacted. This is how crazy people can get. When you're making judgments and decisions about the world around you, you like to think that you're objective, logical, capable of taking in and evaluating all information, including the information you don't like, that is available. Unfortunately, the biases sometimes trip us up, leading to poor decisions and bad judgments. One of the biggest challenges regarding cognitive biases is that it's often hard to recognize our own bias and those of others around us. Also, we may be able to eventually identify some of our own most common cognitive biases. It's a much more difficult task to help others spot and change their biases. And boy, in this day and age, it really is because there's so much bias information out there to support whatever idiotic perspective you want to take, rather than trying to understand things from all kinds of different angles and making a good decision with all that in there. Now, there's a few more common types of cognitive biases that we haven't talked about that distort your thinking. Actor observer bias. This is the tendency to attribute your own actions to external causes while attributing other people's behaviors to internal causes. For example, you may attribute your high cholesterol level to your genetics, while you consider others high level due to being fat and having a bad diet. So it's me, it's my genetics. For you, you're just a pig. Then there's the Confirmation bias. This is favoring information that conforms to your existing beliefs, like every good little narcissist, and discounts evidence that does not conform. There's also a thing called false consensus effect, and this is the tendency to overestimate how much other people agree with you. Boy, do the Democrats love that one. They ride that all the way to the bank. They'll even have billionaires out there funding their false consensus effect. But God only knows that people are lazy. They don't always vote, especially the ones that should. And then they let the crazies vote. And then we have crazy people running our government. Functional fixedness. This is the tendency to see objects as only working in a particular way. For example, if you don't have a hammer, you never consider that a big wrench can also be used to drive a nail into the wall. So you may think you don't need thumbtacks because you have no corkboard, which to tack things, but not consider other issues and other uses. And this could extend to people's functions, such as not realizing a personal assistant has skills to be a leader. Yes, you can tap into skills from one source that can do other things. But some people have to look at every single person. Oh, that person can never, that person can never do anything but answer the phones. Oh, that person can never do anything but coding. That person cannot have a regular conversation. Person cannot run a meeting. That person cannot do this, that, and the other. Because we all like to black and white every single human being on the planet because we're such lazy people. There's also the Halp effect. And that means your overall impression of a person influences how you feel and how you think about their character. That means your first impression. And yes, we all make a first impression. And yes, we all act on our first impressions of people. And therefore, we categorically throw them in a little corner, in a little shoebox, and that's where we place them. And some people are dumb enough to get married and do that to their spouse. And then they communicate to them as if they know them better than they know themselves. These kind of idiots should never be married, and they need to keep it in their pants because they need to get out of the gene pool because they're probably going to pass that crap on to their kids and keep torturing the human race for the rest of our lives. It would be great if they just keep it in their pants, shut their mouth, and move on and try to change and try to understand to be human means to have compassion rather than to be right or make the whole world align with your ugly ass. There's also misinformation effect. This is the tendency for a post-event information to interfere with the memory of an original event. That's called trauma. It's easy to have our memory influenced by what you hear or an event from other people, or the knowledge of this effect leads to mistrust or eyewitness information. So, if I go to a retail store and some stupid 18-year-old kid is customer service and they do 18-year-old customer service, I'm going to call that corporation of that company that I go to as that 18-year-old person that doesn't care about customer service. That's the experience I'm going to have. I'm never going to go in that store again. And guess what? Now that person, that business has lost business because they hired an 18-year-old to do customer service and they get 18-year-old customer service. There's also optimism bias. These people love to blow smoke straight up their own asses. And this bias leads you to believe that you are less likely to suffer from misfortune and more likely to attain success than your peers. These people are so egotistical. They love themselves. They think they are so freaking smart. I live in Seattle. We're filled with those people. They think they're right about everything. Hypothetically, they think they have all the answers and they love to go into government or anything where they have power and put their hypothesis straight on you, despite whether it's right or wrong. They don't care. They just want everybody to feel the pain of who they are and what they believe in and what their hypothesis is, because we're all just little experiments in their ugly little world. And some cities that you live in, like New York, is about to elect a communist, and they're going to have it too. So Merry Christmas. There's also self-serving biases. We already talked about that, but then there is this weird thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is when people believe that they are smarter and more capable than they really are. And when they can't even recognize their own incompetence. These people love to run for office. These people love power. These people love to do their own bias research and then dump it and affect everybody they can, including their children and their spouse and their family and their people that work for them. And they love, with their lack of intelligence, to make great big decisions and destroy everybody's life by their own stupidity and their own ugly ego. This happens over and over because we have the internet and we have social media, which they can pull crap out of that and reinforce their ugly bias, and they can infect the world. What causes this thing, cognitive bias? Well, it's a tribal thing. It's fear-based. They need to build their tribe around themselves so they can feel safe. So, what they do is they get very territorial about their bias. They grab onto as many people that will buy their bias. They live in that little world and they force their biases down people's throat. Now, if you're in a church, that's called doctrine. And yes, they love to shove doctrine down your throat as if all human beings are God Himself. They love that. They love it. But it's really sad because the most sanctimonious, the most wonderful place of your spirituality is actually in your marriage with your spouse and with your children. That is where you're going to be gauged on what kind of person are you really. It's in your covenant. Cognitive bias can be caused by a number of different things, but it's these mental shortcuts that often play a major contributing role. While they often surprisingly accurate, they can also lead to errors in thinking. What gets in our way? Emotional bias. Yes, how you feel. This is what depressed people do. Should I go to work today? Well, I don't feel like it. So they check in with their feelings, and since their feelings are so strong that they don't feel like it, well, they're going to make 1,000 lies up to tell their work why they can't go to work that day. And then they keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, and then they eventually lose their job, and then they're all of a sudden they're a little victim because they sat on their ugly ass doing their stupid things because they're depressed. If you don't want to be depressed, if you don't want to live your life with your emotions first, which means you can never be trusted, you have to do what is right and then check in with how you feel. There's also individual motivations. Individual motivations means I'm competitive, or I want a certain kind of result, or I want to give to another person, or I want to see how this will help other people in my life. I want to do good things. Individual motivations means that we put self-worth in the things that we do to help other people, because a purpose-driven life is never, ever, ever about you. It is about what people seek you for because you took the time to do something significant in your life that is hard, and people can pursue you for that. There's a lot of people that want to be Renaissance people. I want to be good at this, and I want to do that, and I want to do that, I want to dabble in that. Well, if you have a billionaire as a mother and father, I guess you could do that. There's a lot of people that do that. But the deal is, if you're going to survive in this world and you want to make it in this economy of the United States, you better get off your ass and support in rugged individualism, which means you have to find what motivates you. The truth is, there's about 80% of the population in the United States you could drop in the middle of the jungle and they'd be dead in a week. There's another 20% that actually run the world. And those are the people that we want to look up to, and those are the people we want to emulate in our lives. All right, that's our show. I want to thank everybody for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that at libsyn, libsyn.com. It's going to be eventually back to voiceamerica.com. Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, proof is based on what you find attractive. Also, The history of man is thrust forward by pride and vanity. Also, wisdom is breaking free of your own cognitive biases. Thanks for listening, everybody.